Wars are often remembered for their battles, the explosions, the soldiers, the victories and defeats. But history rarely talks about the one thing without which no war could ever exist: money. Before the first soldier marches, before the first weapon is built, before the first shot is fired, someone has already paid. And that payment does not come from thin air. It comes from systems, economic systems, carefully built over centuries. To understand how modern wars are financed, we need to slow down. We need to step away from the battlefield and enter a different arena, the world of money. Because wars are not just fought with weapons, they are fought with budgets, debt, and financial decisions that last far longer than the war itself. This is not a story about who is right or wrong. This is not a political argument. This is a financial reality. This is financing war. War before money. Long before modern governments existed, wars were simple, armies were small, weapons were basic, and wars were short. Kings financed wars using personal wealth, loot from conquered lands, forced labor, and tributes. If a king ran out of money, the war ended. There were no national budgets, no central banks, no long-term debt. War was limited by resources. This is important because it meant wars had natural limits. You could only fight as long as you could afford it. But as societies grew more complex, so did wars. And soon personal wealth was no longer enough. The birth of state-financed war. As nations formed, war stopped being a personal decision of rulers and became a state project. Governments realized something powerful. If the entire population could be taxed, wars could last longer, much longer. This is when taxation became permanent. Citizens were no longer paying only for roads or administration. They were paying for armies they would never join and battles they would never see. The idea was simple: everyone contributes, so the state can fight. This was the beginning of publicly financed war. And once this system was created, there was no turning back. Industrialization changed everything. The industrial age changed war forever. Weapons became machines. Armies became massive. Logistics became complex. Wars were no longer fought with swords. They were fought with factories, railroads, steel, oil, gunpowder. And factories don't run on courage. They run on money. For the first time in history, wars required continuous economic output. Entire economies were reorganized to support conflict. Civilian industries were converted into military production. Governments controlled prices. Workers were redirected. War became an economic operation, and its cost exploded. The real cost, most people never see. When people hear about war costs, they think about weapons. But weapons are only the visible cost. The real cost of war is hidden. Soldiers must be trained for years. Veterans require lifelong care. Families receive compensation. Infrastructure must be rebuilt. And even after the war ends, the spending does not stop. Hospitals, pensions, interest on debt. Some wars officially end, but financially, they never do. This is how wars echo through generations, not through history books, but through budgets. Why modern wars have no natural limit. In the past, wars ended when money ran out. Today, money can be created, borrowed, printed, deferred. This removed the natural brakes on war. Governments no longer need to stop fighting when funds are low. They can push the cost into the future, onto taxpayers, onto inflation, onto generations not yet born. This single change transformed war from a temporary crisis into a long-term financial burden. Taxes, war debt, and central banks. In the first part, we explored how war evolved from personal wealth to state-financed systems. Now we dive deeper into the mechanisms that fund wars in the modern world: taxes, debt, bonds, and central banks. These tools allow governments to sustain conflicts far longer than ever before. And yet, the true cost often falls on citizens who may never see a battlefield. The original war bank. Taxes are the first line of financing for any war. Governments collect money from citizens, businesses, and trade. During peacetime, this money funds roads, schools, hospitals, and administration. During war, priorities shift. Education budgets may shrink, healthcare may receive less funding, and defense spending rises exponentially. Every purchase you make, every paycheck you earn, contributes indirectly to military operations. Taxes are the silent participants in every conflict. Borrowing for battle. Taxes alone are rarely enough for large-scale, prolonged wars. To cover the gap, governments borrow. War bonds, treasury bills, and sovereign debt instruments are all forms of borrowing. Investors lend money to their governments in exchange for interest. Consider this. The United States spent over $300 billion on World War II alone, roughly equivalent to $5 trillion today. Most of this money was borrowed. The consequences are long-term. Interest payments persist for decades. National debt rises. Future generations inherit the burden. Borrowing transforms wars from short-term crises into long-term financial commitments. War bonds, citizens as financiers. Governments have historically asked citizens to participate directly in funding wars. During World War I and II, war bonds became widespread. Ordinary people bought bonds, sometimes small amounts, sometimes large. In return, they were promised repayment with interest in the future. War bonds created a sense of shared responsibility, but they also blurred the line between voluntary support and economic obligation. For many families, purchasing bonds meant sacrificing daily comfort, but they believed it was necessary. And for governments, it was an essential funding mechanism. Central banks, printing war funds. Taxes and borrowing may still fall short in long conflicts. This is where central banks play a critical role. Central banks have the power to create money. They can issue currency, increase liquidity, and finance government spending. But this comes at a price. Printing money can lead to inflation, prices rise, savings lose value. Ordinary citizens who are not fighting on the battlefield may feel the war in every purchase they make. Modern wars often rely on this mechanism. It allows governments to continue fighting even when immediate funds are insufficient. Taxes and borrowing may still fall short in long conflicts. This is where central banks play a critical role. Central banks have the power to create money. They can issue currency, increase liquidity, and finance government spending. But this comes at a price. Printing money can lead to inflation, prices rise, savings lose value. Ordinary citizens who are not fighting on the battlefield may feel the war in every purchase they make. Modern wars often rely on this mechanism. It allows governments to continue fighting even when immediate funds are insufficient. Debt, inflation, and the silent tax. Inflation during war acts as a hidden tax. Citizens may not directly write a check to the military, but their purchasing power diminishes. Consider the hyperinflation experienced in post-World War I Germany. Currency lost value so rapidly that savings became worthless. People could not afford basic necessities, and yet the government continued to pay for military operations and reparations. War debts and inflation shift the burden from governments to the people, quietly, invisibly. Taxes, debt, and power. The combination of taxation, borrowing, and central bank financing allows governments to maintain enormous armies. It also concentrates power. Those who control the money, governments, banks, and financial institutions, can dictate the pace and duration of war. Ordinary citizens, in contrast, have little control. Their sacrifices are necessary but mostly invisible. In many ways, wars are sustained less by bullets and more by ledgers. By the mid-20th century, financing wars had become an intricate system. Taxes, debt, bonds, and central bank mechanisms worked together to create a sustained financial structure. Wars no longer had a natural limit. They could continue as long as money was available, or as long as future generations could be made to pay. In the next part, we will explore the corporate and industrial mechanisms that profit from war, the military-industrial complex, contractors and industries that thrive while battles rage.